Okay, colleagues, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We have quorum. I will start by saying this meeting is held during the COVID-19 emergency. City Hall is open to the public with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. Meetings can be viewed via live stream on YouTube and the city's website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, and advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a formal request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. I will say I will be chairing this meeting up until the mayor's arrival. He should be expected by no later than 4:30. So I'll proceed with the meeting there, and I will start by looking for any disclosures of pecuniary interest from colleagues. Okay, seeing none. Recognitions. There are two that I've been asked to make today. The first is for Jamie Romack. He's a London native who has won the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame's Tip O'Neill Award. Canadian Baseball's Hall of Fame presents this honor annually to the Canadian player judged to have excelled in individual achievement and team contribution while adhering to baseball's highest ideals. He played a full season in 2020, hit 32 home runs and had 91 RBIs, and finished with a 3.99 on-base percentage. Those numbers were the best of any Canadian professional baseball player this year. Most importantly, Jamie is highly respected with his peers and teammates and has been a great ambassador for the game for both London, Ontario, and Canada. We congratulate Jamie on this prestigious award. Certainly the competition was stiff. This award has been won by a number of big names over the years. I was looking over the list. It includes great players like Larry Walker, Jason Bay, and many others. So congratulations to him, and what a great recognition for our city. And if you're a lover of baseball, like I know some of the colleagues in the room are, it's certainly nice to have some great news out of sports this season and this sort of recognition. So that's the first one. The second one is we need to take the opportunity to recognize International Human Rights Day, which will be observed around the world this coming Thursday. It was first commemorated back in 1948, and while many advances have been made and many hearts and minds are more just during that time, we know this occasion is as relevant and as meaningful today as it has ever been. This council and the City of London at large is committed to accessibility, to workplace diversity and inclusion. We value, celebrate, and build upon our relationships with London's LGBTQ community. We were the first council in Canada to make the safety of women and girls a key strategic priority, and we have committed to ending systemic racism in London. Our actions in support of these endeavors may vary in scope and in size, but they must be consistent and they must be constant. So too must our commitment to listening and understanding, especially those with lived experience. International Human Rights Day serves as an important day for the reflection of our progress and a renewed determination to see these commitments through to completion. I know I speak on behalf of all members of council in recognizing the significance of this occasion and our ongoing dedication to the cause of international human rights. Thank you for the moments to do those recognitions, colleagues. I will move to the review of matters to be considered in public, of which there are none. At this time, I require a change in order motion to move for council in closed session and the first report of council in closed session to after stage 13 bylaws. I will look for a mover and a seconder for that particular motion. I see Councillor Lewis and Councillor Cassidy. I will call the vote on that particular question. So hopefully colleagues are logged into eScribe. If you're not, vote manually until you get logged in.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Okay, colleagues, on to the minutes, confirmation and signing of the minutes from previous meetings. I need a motion for the meeting held November 24th, 2020. I'll look for a mover and a seconder on that. Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Hillier. Any discussion on the minutes? No, seeing none, I will call that vote then.
Councillor Hillier? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Communications and petitions. As colleagues can see, there are a number, including one on the added agenda. There are also the items that those communications refer to. I will look for a mover and a seconder to refer those to those relevant items. Moved by Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, we'll open that for voting.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion is passed 14-0.
Motions of which notice is given, there are none. So we're on to committee reports, and the 19th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. I'll turn it over to Chair Cassidy to present the report.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. And I've been asked to pull number 8 from the council agenda, which is 3.3 from the committee report. I haven't heard of anything else that needs to be pulled, but I'll wait and see if colleagues have anything.
Colleagues looking for something else to be pulled? There are none in the chambers, Chair Cassidy, so you can proceed.
Okay, so I will put all the entire report except for number 8 on the floor. I'll just mention a couple of things. There's one item which is item 3.5 from the committee report, or number 10 on the council agenda, the additional residential units requirements under the Planning Act. There are changes that city staff are recommending to put us basically in conformity with Bill 108. We used to call these things secondary dwelling units. The additional residential units terminology comes right from the Act, so we're conforming in that way as well. And I will also mention the application for 1761 Wonderland Road was a public participation meeting. It's something that we've seen before. It's number 7 on the council agenda, and it was initially recommended to be refused by staff. Council chose to refer it back to staff, and it gave the applicant time to work with city staff and with the Housing Development Corporation. We now see quite a number of affordable housing units included in this proposal, 12 altogether, with a 85% below market rent and 50 years of affordability. So that's a really good development, and also the commercial component has been doubled from what was originally proposed in the original in the original application. So staff are recommending approval, and committee went along with that, and committee is recommending approval as well.
Okay, that has been moved. Is there any other comments by colleagues? Okay. Councillor Helmer, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to say about the London Plan monitoring report, lots of great information in there, but very happy to see that in terms of building inward and upward, which we know is essential for the really cost-effective development of the city over the long term. 42% of growth in the built area boundary and 70% of that being within the primary transit area. That's very close to the targets that we set out in the London Plan of 45% and 75%. So we're getting really close to those targets. I think it's a very promising sign, considering that not even all the policies of the London Plan were in effect in the year that we're talking about monitoring. So I just wanted to point that out. I think the report is really helpful in terms of keeping track of those really key metrics in the London Plan.
Great, thank you. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, it's been moved by Chair Cassidy. We'll open this for voting.
Councillor Turner? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I will put number 8 on the floor, and this is the protected major transit station areas. It was Councillor Lehman that asked to pull this, so I'll wait till the end to make comments, if that's okay.
Okay, and you're putting it on the floor, so that's moved. Councillor Lehman, you have some comments. I'll make a list if anybody else would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. In this item, there is a mention of inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning is a relatively new concept that's coming in front of many cities across North America as we all address affordable housing. I think it would be beneficial if the staff kind of gave us a brief overview of what inclusionary zoning is and the potential impacts it has for London.
Okay, I'll send that over to our staff for comment. I'm not sure who's going to jump in on this, but feel free to go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Greg Barrett from Planning. The inclusionary zoning is a completely different process than what's in front of you tonight. But what inclusionary zoning is a regulatory framework that would provide council with the opportunity to adopt policies, and from those policies implementing zoning bylaw amendments that would require a certain component of development to include affordable housing units. The process for adopting inclusionary zoning policies are in fact prescribed and laid out in the Planning Act. And they go through a very long process that starts in fact with an assessment report. And the Act actually says that prior to adopting parts of the official plan which would contain policies about inclusionary zoning, the council shall prepare an assessment report. And what that assessment report is a description of the affordable housing need within the community. And then from that need, direction as to how or what council would consider in trying to provide for and implement inclusionary zoning. The assessment report describes the local conditions and describes what levels of affordability are, and then also lays out with respect to components of the market, how that is met through various components of the market. So this is a really I would suggest to you, very long piece of the process and requires a lot of consultation in order to put this in place, because this in fact is the groundwork for establishing affordability and levels of affordability for those policies. We do have on our work plan the start of that whole process in 2021. And it's our hope that through 2021, we will in fact be going through the development of the assessment report, coming up with preliminary policies and directions based on that assessment report, so that we can package up for you before the end of the year a recommendation on what inclusionary zoning would be. I know that that's perhaps a little bit nebulous, but at this point you go through that exercise to in fact establish your affordability and what those policies would be that you would be implementing through an inclusionary zoning policy and regulatory regime.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. That was very beneficial. And through you, Chair, to staff, would inclusionary zoning apply? Could it apply across London, or would it just apply to the protected major transit station areas?
Through the chair, that's the one connection that in fact is made. What the Planning Act says is that an official plan of municipality may contain policies described for inclusionary zoning in two places: within protected major transit station areas as identified in accordance with the plan, and or in an area with respect to where a development permit system has been adopted or established. So the relationship to the protected major transit station area is that without a development permit system, that is the only area where council's policies for inclusionary zoning would apply. And that's the only connection that's made in the Act.
Go ahead, Councillor.
So my understanding is we could pass this tonight. Inclusionary zoning would be restricted to certain areas in the city. Does that not go across purposes of we want to, have a high density at these points, but yet we could face potential of driving up the cost to developers, which are passed on to people who rent there or buy there. That would lead to a higher cost to live at these points than at other places in the city.
I believe that was a question for you, Mr. Barrett.
Through the chair, that restriction is actually provided in the legislation. It's not something that would be as a result of council adopting policies. The legislation actually limits the use of the inclusionary zoning to either areas identified as protected major transit station areas or areas that would be subject to a development permit planning system. So this action of council doesn't do that limitation. That limitation is actually in the Act. So if council was to consider inclusionary zoning, the only place where they could implement it outside of a development permit planning system would be within the identified protected major transit station area. That's the connection.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. That clears up a lot for me. Appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I do have a couple questions. I'll first tell you my concern. We had just a wonderful development plan for Hamilton Road, and I'm afraid the city was asking a little too much from them. They decided that it wasn't worth it in the end, so they just sold the properties, and the developers went to Toronto to make their investments. What I'm concerned about is the letter that we received from Drulo Holdings, where they say there's some uncertainty about passing this now with respect to the inclusionary zoning. And I think a big tragedy would be for us to find that moving forward with this now without having those details in place about heights, etc., all of us would make our our transit areas where we hope to see development take place, all of a sudden not be that attractive for development, and then that goes someplace else. So to me, that would be sad. So I'm considering moving. I would consider moving referral for this to a little later because of that. However, I'd first like to get some comments from staff on that and the impacts they might see to this request.
Mr. Barrett, the councilor's looking for some comments on that. Are you able to respond?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Maybe, hopefully, this might assuage some of the concerns. The amendment that's in front of you this evening relates to protected major transit station areas. And all that amendment does three things. It identifies the minimum number of residents and jobs per hectare that would be planned to be accommodated within the area identified as protected major transit area. It identifies the authorized uses of land within that identified area. And it establishes minimum densities for those areas. You, in fact, council has, through the adoption of the London Plan, already done that, with the exception of establishing the minimum number of residents and jobs per hectare and the minimum densities through the policies that have been adopted in the London Plan for the downtown, the transit village, and the rapid transit corridor place types. The protected major transit station area policies apply just to those three place types. And those three place types have already been identified as the places where council would be directing the greatest number of jobs and residents and would be establishing the target densities to achieve those levels of development. So in its simplest forms, what's before you tonight takes the policies that are already in the London Plan for the downtown, the transit village, and the rapid transit corridor place type, and puts them under the umbrella of the protected major transit station areas. So the underlying policies of each of those three place types are unchanged. And those policies all direct the highest levels of intensity for both employment and residential development to those corridors. So this doesn't change that or change that direction. And the only connection that this has to inclusionary zoning is under the inclusionary zoning process, whereby if council adopts inclusionary zoning, it can only go to these areas. So there's no sort of need to couple the two of them, because the Act, in fact, doesn't couple them, nor what it is that you're trying to accomplish by these different sets of policies are not tied together. The other thing that I would suggest to you with respect to postponing a decision on this matter is that you'll notice that the recommendation on this is a little bit different. In fact, its council endorses these policies and passes them to the minister for approval, because like a comprehensive official plan review, this is the only action of council that in fact requires minister approval. So if council is to endorse these policies this evening, they would go to the minister. The minister has up to 120 days to decide whether or not these policies are appropriate. If we're to postpone this, that 120 days runs out, which then runs into jeopardy our ability to in fact deal with inclusionary zoning within the year that we had suggested we wanted to get back to you on that whole matter. So what you're doing is in fact postponing the discussion of inclusionary zoning if we don't have this set of policies in place to go forward to the minister, so that we would be able to have that place where inclusionary zoning could land if that's where council decides to go after that review process. So they're not tied together. There's no reason to hold off on the approval of this, because like I said, this is doing three things and three things only: ascribing minimum levels of employment and residential development per hectare, establishing the range of uses, and establishing minimum densities, all of which are within the parent policies of those 3 place types that are under the protected major transit station area.
Councillor?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think that's quite helpful. Now, the establishment of minimum densities, I don't think would be objected to by developers. I do have a question. What percentage of those areas would now have properties that would be legally non-conforming because their densities are too low? So maybe that might be my question.
Mr. Barrett?
Through the chair, that hasn't been done because legal nonconforming relates to zoning. This is not zoning. This is the policy matter. These are the policies that would establish those minimum densities for you. What I can tell you is that those minimum densities are aligned with the densities that exist along those corridors and the densities that are planned within, again, the parent policies of each of those place types. So we're not establishing anything new. We're establishing what those conditions are, but under the context of the protected major transit station area.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it helps put my colleagues at ease on this, there's a long path to inclusionary zoning. Before we can even start talking about how and what framework there is for inclusionary zoning, we need to pass this, which identifies the places where inclusionary zoning can happen, but it doesn't dictate that inclusionary zoning will happen there. This is just in that area where it can happen. In the other areas, as Mr. Barrett identified within the development permit system, should we adopt one of those much later down the road. There's going to have to be a much bigger conversation about inclusionary zoning, when we use it, where we use it, how we use it, and who it applies to. Before we can even get to that step, the first step in this is the discussion and identifying the major transit station areas. So I recognize how it can be mixed up in the discussion. I think at planning, we had there's a bit of excitement because it's our first opportunity to start talking about inclusionary zoning. We had the affordable housing toolkit that we've asked staff to develop. There are still some things that need to come together for us to see what those are. And then we'll have a menu of options for our council to be able to consider whether we want to do affordable housing, whether we want to do social housing, whether we want to do it in small chunks, whether we want to do it in big chunks, whether we wanted to do it here or there. All of that, one of the tools towards getting towards affordable housing is inclusionary zoning. There are pros and there are cons to it too. As Councillor Van Holst identified, perhaps it becomes a disincentive to development in some circumstances, but in other circumstances, it's an incentive, and there might be opportunities to be able to encourage developers, or in some cases compel. That all depends on our discussion as a council, and it depends on where we want to go, but that's not the discussion today. The discussion today is just identifying, as Mr. Barrett identified, what those areas for potential inclusion in the future might be. But they're consistent with what we've already identified in the London Plan. The London Plan has a policy goal of 25% of all new housing to be affordable. That's a policy goal, but there's nothing that compels us to do that right now. And so this is one of those things that may help us reach that policy goal at some point in the future, but it's not today. And so I recognize the concerns from LDI and from Drulo, but I think they're grossly misinterpreting what is being asked of us tonight. Maybe through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Barrett, am I capturing that appropriately, or did I miss anything?
Mr. Barrett.
No, through the chair, the councillor did a much better job than I did trying to assuage some of the concerns that council might have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to our staff. First of all, thank you for some of the explanations on this. It has been helpful already to know the three things that this is looking to accomplish. I did have a question, and it does relate to the concern that we've heard from the industry in terms of moving ahead with inclusionary zoning. And, one of the points that they raised over the past few days is, if the height is insufficient to offset the balance of the cost for affordable being distributed amongst the other units and then making them economically unviable to go ahead. I can see where the concern comes from, because we don't know quite yet what inclusionary zoning is going to look like. So through you to our staff, my question is, if we get further down the road and we get some policies in place around inclusionary zoning that we find are becoming a disincentive to development, if we find that the heights are too low, in the old bonusing regime, we could simply give them additional floors of building that they could then create some more units and spread the cost out that way. What does the process look like? And again, I know we're projecting into the future here, but if we hit that barrier, what does the process look like then to address that barrier? Are we sending another OPA to the minister for another approval that could be 120 days happening? Like what would the mechanism be to address this in the future?
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. Through the chair. The council's actually done a great job of identifying some of the many wrinkles in this. The shorter answer is that if we need to change these policies to implement what arises from the discussions and the policy direction around inclusionary zoning, then we would come back to you, and that would be part of that comprehensive official plan amendment that would be tied to that. The councillor also noted the notion of bonus zoning. Bonus zoning, as we've reported earlier under changes to the Plan Act, disappears as an implementation tool. And it's also one of the matters that's under appeal in the London Plan. And it's been put aside from the appeals in the London Plan because there's no sense in arguing alternative policy language for a set of policies that are going to disappear within the next less than 2 years now. So we will be bringing forward to you a whole series of amendments tied to this, because we have to bring forward amendments tied to bonus zoning, because you've got bonus zoning as a whole policy construct within your official plan now, which won't exist. There's a whole construct about bonus zoning that's tied to affordable housing that will no longer exist. So all of this will be coming forward as different amendments as we move forward to deal with how do we replace bonus zoning where that's not going to exist. What does that mean with respect to affordable housing larger to the affordable housing policies, and how might those have to be amended? And then if, as the councillor noted, if the constraint in the heights within those corridors is a limitation, then we would have to fix those heights. But all of that, as Councillor Turner noted, and as I tried to describe, would be looked at through that whole inclusionary zoning process, where in fact we'll look at those kinds of things and see if any of these things are standing in the place of impediments. And we would have the opportunity to make those changes then to bring that forward to wrap that all together. So short answer, if we need to make the change, we can make that change. I'm not familiar, or I'm not sure about whether or not once council has approved, or once these policies are in place and they've been approved by the minister, if then it requires to go back to the minister to amend them. That's something we can follow up on. But we've got that time, because any amendments to these policies that would be driven by our considerations around inclusionary zoning would be coming forward after this study that we have to go through to actually come back to you with recommendations on inclusionary zoning. And at that time, we'd be able to clarify as to whether or not that requires a ministerial approval for the protected major transit station area policies, or if in fact that those policies are now council's purview and they could all be done as part of that amendment.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, I've got two hopefully short questions for you, Mr. Barrett, through the chair. And the first centers around a question that was raised by Councillor Van Holst, and I know that we heard reference to the toolkit that's being developed outside of the protected major transit station areas. Will there be tools in that toolbox to allow for incentivizing of affordable housing options outside of these areas, noting that the IZs will only be applied inside these areas?
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, in fact, there are many things in the toolbox now that are outside and that we could look at expanding. We've got a community improvement plan, policies and programs in place that support various forms of affordable housing, including the provision of secondary dwelling units and contributions towards affordable housing in high density development. So we already have programs that are outside of this. And as I said, we're going to have to come up with policies and then hopefully implementation tools as they relate to bonusing, because that tool won't exist and that's outside the IZ. And so we'll be coming forward with some tools, hopefully, to replace that would also serve as incentives to provide for the provision of affordable housing through the development process.
Okay, and through the chair, my last question for you, Mr. Barrett, and I'm sure that I know the answer already, but I'm going to ask it because it's important, I think, for the public record. As we move forward in the inclusionary zoning policies development, there will be an opportunity, of course, for the industry representatives to participate in helping form what those policies will look like in terms of, we will be consulting them on the economies of scale. You know, if we need 10 units of affordable housing, well, we're gonna have to spread that out over 6 floors, for example. You know, and I know I'm really simplifying the discussion here, but if we need 15 units of affordable housing, well, we can only accomplish that if we spread it out over 12 floors. That kind of discussion will be involved in developing our inclusionary policies, correct?
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. And again, through the chair, certainly, yes. And that's in fact, consultation with the development industry is key to bringing forward a workable, if we go down that road, but workable inclusionary zoning, because inclusionary zoning is all about, in fact, the private market providing for that affordable housing component. So we can't come forward without having a long, very thorough and very engaging discussion with the development industry as we go through that process.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. And those answers have helped solidify my thoughts on this. So thank you.
Councillor Helmer.
I think it's been covered.
Great. I have no other speakers. I have a motion that is, Councillor Van Meerbergen, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Barrett touched on it just in his last comments, that without the development community and full buy-in from them, all of this may be mute. So it strikes me that right from the get-go, we need to be on the same page with the development community. And it's quite clear that the LDI and others from that community have expressed to us confusion and really not having the information they need to be on side. They were asking for, I believe, a 12-month stay on this so they could get up to speed. What I would propose is 60 days. And I think if we give them that 60 days to get that further information so that we can launch this on a more stable footing cohesively, that would make sense. It's not that great a deal of time. We had 2 months to the 4 months for the minister. That's comes out instead of 4, goes to 6. I don't see the downside to that. I think it makes sense. It could very well pave the way further down with this kind of early buy-in. So I would move a referral of 60 days on this.
Okay, let me, I'll get the wording from the clerk on what the referral will look like, but first I want to see if there's even a seconder for this. Councillor Van Hulst, is that putting your hand up a second?
Yes.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Councillor Van Meerbergen, I just want to be clear, since you were trying to give someone time, is this at least 60 days or within 60 days that you want this referral to be reported back within?
I would say within 60 days.
Okay. Okay, debate on the referral. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. I would urge colleagues to vote against the referral. What staff are recommending to us is a process, and it's a process that has been laid out by the Ford government, by the provincial government, recognizing that the provincial government is in favor of building more affordable housing across the province and in cities like London. And they have recognized that a tool that had recently been given to municipalities by the previous provincial government was being taken away. So there was inclusionary zoning that had been passed. We had not even begun to take advantage of that tool, and the provincial election took place. So what the Ford government is offering us in place of what had been allowed for a short period of time is this. And all they want us to do is identify specifically where the possibility for inclusionary zoning could take place. And when it comes to densities, it's important that staff talk about minimum densities, because with some exceptions, along these corridors is where we would anticipate the biggest heights, the highest heights, and the highest densities for residential development. So it's not about limiting developers in the heights and the densities. It's about asking them to include affordable housing where they are already going to be allowed the highest heights and the greatest densities. So again, staff are recommending a process, and as Mr. Barrett pointed out, this will take the better part of 2021. So the first step in the process is to identify the protected major transit station areas, which happen to coincide with our primary transit areas, with the rapid transit corridors. And so it's identifying those areas where at some point in the future, after more engagement, more discussion, more debate, and passing of rezoning, then we will move forward with possible inclusionary zoning. One thing that did happen at the Planning Committee meeting was there was obviously very robust discussion, but Mr. Wallace from LDI spoke very highly of the engagement process so far in dealing with these PMTSAs. Spoke very in a complimentary way of city staff, planning staff, and the amount of discussion and conversation, and the fact that planning staff took in their concerns and made adjustments and modifications based on the industry's concerns. And we had a commitment made by staff that that kind of engagement is exactly what will take place throughout 2021. Stakeholders, the industry, and citizens in general will be invited to engage in this process. I have confidence in staff that what they've done so well so far will continue. And the committee, the planning committee, voted unanimously, 6 votes to 0, to support the staff recommendation. Every single member of the planning committee supported the staff recommendation. It is coming to you, council, as a unanimous recommendation from the planning committee. I urge you to reject the referral and vote in favor of the staff recommendation and the recommendation coming from the planning committee.
Thank you. The motion is now up on the screen, moved and seconded. I'm going to read it before I continue with the speakers list for those who cannot see it at home. It says that the matter of a protected major transit station areas be referred back to the Planning and Environment Committee in order for additional consultation with the industry, with a report back within 60 days. I have Councillor Squire on the referral, followed by Councillor Van Holst on the referral.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think I think it's important to recognize that there was input at the Planning Committee, as Councillor Cassidy said. I think for a referral to be supported, there really has to be something substantive there that could be worked on, changed, to bring it back to the planning committee and council. And nobody has sort of suggested that to me at this point in time. I have concerns about where we end up on this road, if I can call it that. I have concern about many aspects of it, but today, from my point of view, is not the day that we're going to determine that. And I'm satisfied there will be lots of opportunities as we move forward with this process in place to have that input. So I won't be supporting the referral, but I don't want anyone to think that the concerns that have been forwarded by LDI and Drulo are not important to me. They are important, and I think a lot of them are valid concerns that should receive full consideration as we move along in this process. But I don't see how a referral today accomplishes that, except delays and then brings us back with the same thing in a very short period of time.
Councillor Van Holst on the referral.
Thank you. So I'll support the referral because of the answer that Councillor Lewis got to his question, which was, would we be able to amend our ask if we decided it needed to be changed, and staff said they don't know. So I think that's something I would like to have confidence in, and seeing that we're in a partnership with our development community, as was pointed out by Councillor Van Meerbergen. I'm happy to give our development community that's 60 days. That's fine for me. I don't believe that sets us back, and everyone will be more comfortable, including myself. So that's how I'll be voting. Thank you.
Councillor Hammer on the referral.
Thank you. I know it's been about 4 months since we dealt with this last at Planning Committee, because I wasn't at that meeting because it was 2 days after my daughter was born, and today's her 4-month birthday. I have to tell you, like, I don't hear a lot of people saying, hey, government, what you need to do is go slower on affordable housing and things related to transit and housing. I just don't hear that. The development community is certainly very concerned about inclusionary zoning, but what we're actually doing here is putting in minimums along these corridors. And I have to tell you, as somebody who represents an area where one of these corridors goes through, and there's huge development opportunities all the way down that corridor, both on the commercial side and on the residential side. There's several thousand units of residential housing that's going to be built in the psychiatric hospital lands. The sooner we get in minimum densities in policy, the better. Because what we don't want is for something that's too low density to be built along the corridor between now and when we figure it out. So, you know, some of these policies are already in the London plan. I think this is a good floor, right? So we're establishing minimums, we're putting in some heights. These are all things that are already in the London plan. This is just clarifying what it's going to be like. There are people who want to know, you know, what is the minimum and maximum heights along these corridors? Because I have development projects that I want to know how tall they can be. And if in the future, after dealing with inclusionary zoning, there's some discussion about how things need to be even taller, you know, we can have that discussion then. But I don't see the need to hold this up now. We're really just deciding where and what the minimums are going to be. And I'm satisfied with the minimums. You know, if I thought the minimums needed to be higher, then I could see some reason for delay, but I don't see that. And I think what the development industry is talking about is that the maximums need to be higher. And if the maximums need to be higher, we can have that conversation after we've dealt with inclusionary zoning. So I don't see the real need for delay. We're not going to have inclusionary zoning figured out within 60 days. So I think, as Councillor Squire has pointed out, we'd be basically at the same point. We just have taken 60 days longer to get there.
Thank you. I have Councillor Hopkins as the last person on my list.
Yes, thank you. I guess I'll just speak to the referral, and I agree with Councillor Helmer and Councillor Squire just talked about. Not sure how further ahead we're going to be in 60 days to where we are today. And I just do want to remind my colleagues here, this is just the framework that we are establishing. It is coming down from the provincial government. When I came on council back in 2014, one of my first questions was around inclusionary zoning because that was starting to be a conversation. And we in the municipality we didn't have the toolkit for affordable housing. We are slowly building the tools. This will be one. There'll be many conversations to be had with the industry moving forward with inclusionary zoning, but this is coming from the provincial government. We were told a number of years ago, well, we can't go here, we can't go there, because we're not sure what the provincial government is going to be telling us and directing us. This is a direction from them. This is a framework working with the minimums. There's more to come with this, and I really would urge you not to support the referral back, because I'm not exactly sure what we're going to be doing for 60 days here, how much further ahead we will be with this framework that we have to send to the ministry. So I would ask my colleagues to not support the referral back and to support the recommendation coming from planning. That is something that, being on the planning committee, I appreciate the work and efforts that went into the public participation meeting that we had. And there was a lot of good conversation happening, but I did not get any indication that we needed to do more engagement at this time with stakeholders. Not sure how things are going to change in 60 days, so I will not be supporting the referral.
Okay, that exhausts the list. Good discussion on the referral. I see no other speakers, so I'm going to open up the voting on the referral.
Closing the vote, the motion is lost, 2-12.
Okay, and that leaves us back with the main motion, which is moved by the chair, Councillor Cassidy. I have no one left on my original speakers list. So if there's no further comments, I see none. I'm going to open up the number 8 as recommended by the committee for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed, 13-1.
Okay, Councillor Cassidy, I think that's everything on your report, correct? Yes,
Yeah,
let me just say, that was the 19th report of the Planning and Environment Committee, and I believe your last as chair. So on behalf of council, thank you for your service as chair. I know we had a few people who ended last time, but I certainly wanted to recognize the work that you have done in shepherding that committee to us. Councillor Hopkins, you're waving your hand vigorously. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Chair, for recognizing me, because this is an opportunity here at Council to thank the committee members that are going to be leaving the Planning Committee. And I want to thank Councillor Helmer, Councillor Cassidy, Councillor Calbaga, and Councillor Turner. I learned a lot from each and every one of you, and I have always appreciated being on planning and the debate that we have. We have had many debates and through the past couple years, and as much as I may not have agreed with everything, it was a robust debate, and I've always learned something from each and every one of you. So I want to thank you, and I also look forward to working with the new committee members that will be coming to planning. Thank you.
Well said, Councillor Hopkins. We're on to the first report of the Community and Protective Services Committee, and one of our new committee chairs, Councillor Helmer. Turn it over to you.
Thank you. I haven't heard from anybody that they want anything pulled separately. I'll maybe give people an opportunity to just catch my attention if you do. If not, I'll put the whole report on the floor.
Yeah, there are none in the chambers, so you can, looks like you can go ahead, except for Councillor Van Meerbergen had his hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to pull 2.1 from the report. And I'm wondering if that could be separated into an A and a B. It seems that there were 2 votes at committee. If we could vote on those separately, as they did at committee.
We believe you're on the wrong report, at least the clerks do. Which is the matter you're referring to?
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Pardon me, I'm mixed up. Pardon me.
Okay.
Withdraw that.
Okay, so we're good for the entire Community and Protective Services report, I think. So I'll turn it back to you, Councillor Helmer, to present that.
Okay, I just wanted to flag that Councillor Hillier is going to be the vice chair for the committee. The committee made that decision. Welcome aboard, Councillor Hillier. We had the emergency management update and report on Ontario Works, and also the added report, which is about the city's winter response to support unsheltered individuals. Committee supported that recommendation unanimously. It's obviously an important step forward in terms of responding to the needs of people who are currently living unsheltered, creating 4 locations, 2 that are day space and 2 that are both day space and overnight space. I will say, just from my own perspective as the councillor for Ward 4, I certainly heard from a lot of folks, both positive and worried about what is being proposed, especially in around McMahon Park. I will say that people sort of fall into 3 categories. You know, people who are really against the idea of having something located that close to where they live. People who are okay with it kind of begrudgingly, as long as it's temporary, and people who think it's a very good idea and they're glad to see us moving in this direction so quickly. So, you know, it's not without controversy, but I think it's the right thing to do. We need to do something to support these folks who are living unsheltered. And I think the idea of having 4 different locations in different parts of the city and trying to get them all up and running is the right direction. So hopefully people will support that report.
Okay, and I see Councillor Van Holst followed by Councillor Turner. I assume these are comments on the full slate, not pulling something. Okay, I see nods. Councillor Van Holst, you go ahead.
Thank you very much. So first, maybe I'll make a comment on item 8, our winter response program. I was pleased to see that we were buying some trailers because then we'll have something to show for it afterwards. Of course, if we just put people up in hotels, then we don't have something to use later on or at other times of the year. So I was pleased to see that. I'll comment, maybe have a question regarding item 2.3 or number 5 on this agenda, the extension of delegated authority. It seemed like that was pretty much limited to patio decisions. And so this is being extended until April. So I wondered through you, Mr. Chair, if staff sees us really doing much more than making quick decisions on patios for our businesses.
Mr. Chair, if I might take a chance on that one.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is an extension of the powers that were granted to us earlier on in the pandemic that allows us to process largely patios, but other things like sidewalk sales and other events that use of public space in a quicker and more efficient fashion. It also allows us to extend the patio season through the winter, where traditionally we have had a moratorium on them to manage snow removal, and then this will take us into the spring when our normal patio season starts. Our hope is that for those businesses who wish to continue to engage in outdoor retail through the winter, that we can continue to support them as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Okay, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you, perhaps to Mr. Dickens, I just had a question about the 2.2, the Ontario Works Participant Service Delivery Profile. In the table 4, there's a graph and a table that describes the amount of time that people spend on assistance. And it talks about a focused effort on those who have spent more than 2 years, or even in some circumstances more than 4 years on assistance and supports. Recognizing, I think one of the challenges with social assistance and supports is kind of that hardening of dependence on those supports and movement from longer term or from those initial supports into a longer term. Perhaps, Mr. Dixon, so you might be able to describe kind of the efforts that might be done at the outset when somebody first goes on to supports, and because creating those wraparound supports in the initial stages to be able to get them off of supports quickly helps to prevent that longer term solidification of those who might be on social assistance supports in the much longer term. I see a rather intensive effort being needed at that longer term stage, and probably more disproportionately a lot more effort at the longer term than in the beginning. And perhaps that was discussed about in committee, but I didn't get a chance to hear.
I'll turn that over to our staff.
Certainly, and through the chair, thank you for the question. Yeah, the time on assistance is something that is impacting every municipal service manager across the province when it comes to those in receipt of social assistance. What we're finding is that we do have a very focused and dedicated wraparound support system in place where we try to rapidly connect people to employment agencies, to social supports that exist in the community. Often we're seeing some people come in, and we saw this in 2019 in particular, come in and have a very quick touch with Ontario Works that accounts for a significant portion of our, or meaningful portion of our caseload, and then move on rather quickly back into the labor market. You're right about the hardening aspect, and we are seeing that play out in our caseload, where some folks, the longer you spend on assistance, the harder it is to break free from it. Where we're finding some success, however, is through our Circles program. That program is designed and intended to work with individuals who have spent at minimum 24 months on social assistance. Our stats in that program have been reported through a previous committee, but we're seeing upwards of 70% of the participants obtain employment through the Circles program and start to find stable employment so they can exit social assistance. I think in combination with programs like the Circles, in Getting Ahead, Bridges Out of Poverty, as well as the improvements we've been making to our intake system, and improvements, frankly, we've made to our employment purchase of service agreements, we should see this trend start to move in the right direction. But it is a challenge that all service managers, we continue to discuss and we continue to share best practices, because it is plaguing all municipalities across Ontario.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dickens. I appreciate that. I think this is a really important part of the report. Identifying those aspects that become either barriers or indicators of success are really important for us to know, so that we can help support those things. If they require funding, these are areas of focus that we need to do. And a program like the Circles program, I've had a chance to witness one of the sessions within that, and seen quite a significant amount of compassion, understanding, a very trauma-informed approach to working with those who have been on prolonged periods of social assistance, and helping to move them forward and advance their lives. So if those are the things that we can identify, especially in these length of time on assistance, that help us as a council to be able to support that work, those are really important and strong to be able to draw out. So I appreciate the report. I found it with a lot of really good information and kind of thought-provoking for where we go from here.
Thanks. I have no further speakers on the, what is the entire first report of the Community and Protective Services Committee. So seeing no other speakers, we will open that for voting.
Chair, I vote yes.
Councillor Salee. Closing the vote, the motion's carried 15-0.
Colleagues, I'm going to ask for a 5-minute recess. So the mayor has returned. I'm going to hand the chair back over to him, but we are going to switch stations. I'm going to need to log out. We'll have this quickly sanitized, and then the mayor and I will switch back to our original seats. So I'll just do a hand vote for a 5-minute recess, but don't go anywhere. This shouldn't take too long. All those moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Squire. Okay. All those in favor?
Motion's carried.
Okay, 5 minutes.
the discussions around the vaccine and the like. So I appreciate all of your indulgence with respect to this. Colleagues, we're at 8.3 of the agenda, the 19th report of the Corporate Services Committee. I'd like to call on Councillor Karabaga, please, to present the report, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'd like to put the 19th report of the Corporate Service Committee on the floor, with the exception of 2.1, which is the taxation of properties owned by LMHC. And I haven't heard from colleagues if they wanted to pull anything else.
Does anyone else wish to have anything else dealt with separately? Councillor Helmer, I see you have your hand up. I see no other items. Is it on this specific item or was there something else?
It's on the 2.1, which has been pulled.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, anything else? Seeing none, comments or questions on those items, with the exception of 2.1. Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Councillor Cassidy?
It just came up. It was loading that whole time.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you. Councillor Karabaga.
Thank you. I'd like to put 2.1, which is the taxation of properties owned by London Middlesex Community Housing. And I would like to go to Councillor Helmer, who's the one who asked me to pull it.
Councillor Helmer, do you wish to start?
Thank you. So colleagues, you would have seen that I circulated a letter trying to explain why I moved the motion that I did at committee, which failed on a 3-3 tie. So I'd like to introduce that motion tonight as an amendment to the committee recommendation, which was to receive the report, and just speak about why I think we should move forward and get a second report to committee about this issue. I believe Councillor Slee has indicated he's willing to second that amendment.
Just bear with me, colleagues. Councillor Slee?
Yep, happy to second the motion.
Thanks very much. Comments, questions?
If I could just speak to the motion now that it's on the floor.
Go ahead, Councillor.
First, I want to say, colleagues, that it's important that we recognize that the funders of community housing are first and foremost the tenants in community housing. They put in $11.8 million a year into community housing of the city and the county. And what I am proposing and proposed last year, about 14 months ago, is can we look at a way of lowering the property tax rate on community housing so that it's the same as the property tax rate on the house that I'm in right now. The same as the property tax rate on a condo building downtown that's market housing. Is to how can we get it down to be the same rate? I think it was very clear in the discussion at committee that, you know, if we were able to lower the property tax rate on community housing, there's a question about what would we do with the tax savings? And I think people might disagree about what could be done with those tax savings. Should they be, you know, clawed back? So should we lower the grant to community housing to essentially make keep everything the same? If we did that, then we would face the problem that city staff have identified, which is, you know, the county would also save some money and we would be out and we'd have to make that up if we wanted to keep everything the same. We could also just leave the money with London Middlesex Community Housing and they could spend it instead of on property taxes. They could spend it on the many, many other things that would make living in community housing better. So what my motion that I tried to get passed at committee and unfortunately was not successful in convincing everybody to support was, let's take a staged approach. So the original motion 14 months ago was can we report back on whether it's feasible? And my takeaway from the staff report, which recommended taking no action, was it is feasible, but it would be a pretty big bite to do it all at once. And phasing it over 4 years is probably easier way to manage it. I'm asking for a second report on this about how we could do it over a phased 4-year approach, recognizing that we're not deciding how to allocate the savings at this time, and we can make a separate decision on that where we might not all agree on that. But I hope that we can agree that it makes sense to tax community housing where the lowest income people in the city are living at the same rate as the housing that we live in, or the housing that is downtown, like luxury condo building. Should be the same rate. It definitely should not be higher. And it shouldn't be almost twice as high. So I'm hoping that we can get there. I think it's going to take us a while to get there. I think the next step is to get a report to see how we can do it. And I do think there's an opportunity. I know that there was a lot of discussion about the county and who's going to save money and how. The situation for community housing is basically the same in the county of Middlesex. So they're taxing their community housing at a higher rate than they do the residential housing. We pay for that. 85% of the cost is borne by the City of London. And so, perhaps we can convince the county that they should do the same thing, and that some of the savings there that comes through that cost sharing apportionment can flow back to the City of London. It's not going to make up the whole difference, but it would cover part of the problem. And I think there's room to work cooperatively on that. We are, in fact, both stakeholders in community housing, along with the tenants. So I think it's the right thing to do. I don't want to give up at this point. I don't want to take no action. I'd love to see a further report where we can see how can we make some progress on this over the next 4 years. I think doing it building by building is probably going to be how we could manage it. That's the same way that we have managed the affordable housing tax bylaws, which we've passed for those 17 projects, where we say, for these affordable housing projects, we're going to lower the tax rate down so it's effectively the same as the residential. And that's all I'm looking for community housing, is to treat it the same way we have those 17 affordable housing projects that we've passed those bylaws for. So that's my pitch. I hope that all three members of the committee who weren't convinced that committee might come around and see the value in getting a second report. We can have a separate discussion about what's going to happen with those tax savings. I think they should stay with London Middlesex community housing. I think that's appropriate. Other people might want to do something else with it. And we can have that discussion through our normal budget update process in the future.
Thanks very much. Excuse me, any other comments or questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I did support this at committee. And I guess to start off with, it's to me, it's about doing it in stages here and understanding. I'm not a tax expert. I'm not even an accountant. But I do think there's something wrong with us taxing our community housing at a higher rate than the residential rate. And it's not as simple as, well, we'll give them more money. It's how can we make some changes? This council, we have that alignment. We all understand and support affordable housing in whatever shape and form. It's important that this council, we've aligned ourselves with the importance of affordable housing. And this is just taking another look at a possibility of looking at it through different stages. Other discussions can come forward with this report coming back on how would it look if we lowered the rate. I'm willing to have a look at that because I'm not the expert here. I'd like to see the figures. I'd like to understand ways, possibilities of having, moving money around to accommodate the maintenance that's needed in our buildings. As you know, many buildings, in particular, the high rises are getting quite old. And I know sitting on the board in the past, we had discussions on different ways. How can we find opportunities? This is a report back on looking at reducing that tax rate That's all it is. And I really look forward to that report back and having further discussions as we move forward, dealing with our community housing, because it is something that we should be constantly evaluating and looking at to see how we can maintain these buildings as they are starting to age. So I appreciate Councillor Helmer's research. In particular, I didn't have a chance, but I wanted to see what other communities were doing. And I really appreciate the research that he did in Toronto and Ottawa. They've got full exemptions. We're not even going there. We're looking at a residential rate. Forget the full exemption. But I think it's important that we as a council understand what other communities are doing. And this, again, is just a report back. And I would encourage my colleagues to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. I didn't support this at the committee, and I won't support it again this time. There's lots of minutia that we deal with that councillors could develop a sense of injustice over, but we really need to stick to the kinds of initiatives and assignments for staff that are going to have a concrete impact on our constituents. Staff returned the report that we asked them to do. They said this approach wasn't a recommended one, creates a net loss of money from London to the county. So we've got less to invest in our community and not more. They suggest we could achieve the same outcome with a grant in a much less complicated and easy way. And I'd point out that when we're trying to achieve an objective, it's important to maximize the amount of work that we don't do. So this would be another report. And I would say that spreading something out over 4 years is actually more complicated again. And a poor idea spread out over 4 years doesn't make it a good idea by phasing it in. So I also don't think we need to complicate our taxes by creating yet another set of exemptions. So I don't have a problem with high residential high rises being taxed as high rises, and then us dealing with it afterwards since we own it. So those are my comments. I'm fine the way it is. If we need to help London Middlesex more with the housing, we can easily do that with another approach.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm listening to what everybody's saying on this. I have a couple of questions through you to our staff. And I'm going to preface that by saying, and I say this with all due respect to Councillor Helmer and Councillor Hopkins, where we have 0% exemptions in other communities, we also don't have another municipal partner involved. So I don't think that we can compare ourselves to Ottawa or to Toronto when we have a partner in Middlesex County who would have to be engaged in any sort of change, I honestly feel, on this in order for us to be fair to them. Through you to our staff, though, I want to ask our city treasurer, in regard to the property tax that we charge London Middlesex community housing, we are in fact, it's really it's a wash, because are we not in fact compensating them for the property taxes with a grant to offset those property taxes?
Ms. Barbone.
Through the chair, absolutely. The net cost of the LMCH budget is funded through a cost sharing agreement between London and Middlesex. So any expenditures that need to be funded at the end of their budget, approximately 85% is borne by the city, and the remaining 15% is borne by the county.
So unlike in a residential situation, then, Your Worship, through you to staff, there would be no direct savings to residents in London Middlesex housing because in fact, the corporations of Middlesex County and the City of London are offsetting those costs to begin with. So it would not be the same as a savings to a residential unit for an occupant there, correct?
Ms. Barbo.
Through the chair, the rent that tenants at LMCH pay is based specifically on a rent geared to income formula. So the rent does not change based on the expenses. So it will, based on whatever amount that revenue comes forward, the remaining expenses are deducted off of that, and the rest is cost shared between the two municipalities.
Councillor.
Thank you for that. So through you, Chair, to our staff, and I'll share, and I hear what Councillor Hopkins was saying about the badly needed capital repairs in some of our buildings. I'll share with colleagues that at 632 Hale Street, we've had and it was recently repaired, but only last week we had an elevator out. Of the two elevators, one was out of service for quite a number of days, which is a challenge to a building where the residents are older or facing mobility challenges primarily. So going down to one elevator is a concern for them. And this is not the only building with some capital repairs that are badly needed. I hear the desire, at least in part, it's been referenced, even though we're not necessarily committing to that we would just reinvest this in the capital, but we actually don't have a public oversight board right now. We have an administratively appointed one through civic administration, and we do have an organization that's actually had some difficulty getting money that's been allocated to it spent in the calendar years it was allocated in order to get some of these repairs completed. So I haven't heard from our chair of the board that they actually are in a position where they need more funding right now to address capital concerns, or that they could address capital concerns even if they had more money. But through you to our treasurer again, I think, would that not come to us if there was a need for that through a budget amendment from our board at Middlesex Housing Corporation?
I'm not sure if that's Ms. Barbone or Mr. Dickens.
Through the chair, I can confirm that I did have a discussion with through the board chair with LMCH, who did advise that they didn't submit a budget amendment through the multi-year budget for additional funding for 2021, and that they do not have any other additional funding requests at this time. So they did note that if they did have a funding request, that they would submit a budget amendment following the city's budget process, consistent with the normal budget process.
Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on all the bases there. So I hear where Councillor Helmer wants to go. I'm not sure that this is the means to get there and what I'm hearing right now, because we're not going to save the residents of our housing corporation or our community housing any direct dollars. We don't have an ask coming for more money right now to change this rate, and we have a funding agreement with Middlesex County in place right now. So I think that the appropriate time to look at this would be when our funding agreement with Middlesex County comes up to be renewed, and deal with it at this time. I appreciate where Councillor Helmer's trying to free up some resources in the housing file, but I'm not sure that we're actually going to achieve anything here when we're not having an ask that says we can actually spend this money right now, and we're not putting money back in people's pockets. So I'm going to continue to listen to the debate here and see what others have to say. I'm not convinced that this is the route to go on this file.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, I'm going to time myself. Because I'm going to say a couple things, and I only get to speak once. So I appreciate the dialogue we had at committee. I think it was really good. I think we talked about a lot of issues. We talked about the staff report. We talked about the direction that Councillor Helmer wanted to go. And these are very reasonable conversations to have. I found myself at the end of the meeting trying to figure out what problem we're actually trying to solve with the tax reduction. And it was mentioned that other communities have I think it was Councillor Hopkins, have gone to like a full exemption to zero. Well, in other communities, they may be giving X number of millions of dollars to their housing entity, And that housing entity is giving X number of millions of dollars in an equal amount back to that municipality. And so it makes sense in that case to just cut out the back and forth, hand money back and forth process, and just go straight to a full exemption, which the Act does allow. When you have a service provider partnership with the county, you can't do that as a straight up, reduce the property tax and reduce the grant one-to-one, because we have a cost sharing agreement. And so it's a little more complicated for us than other municipalities, because if we were the sole provider and we were in that situation, I wouldn't just be talking about reducing it to the residential rate. I would be supportive of going right to zero and just making it a wash, reducing the grant. LMCH would be no better or worse off in that position, and we could have a separate conversation about their budget needs through the budget process. So I'm unclear still on what the rate reduction to the residential rate would actually do for LMCH in the absence of letting them keep the tax savings, which I think should be a separate budget discussion, and I'll talk about that, why I think that in a second. It is very attractive to be able to say we reduced the tax rate on housing properties. But the reality is that, what is the actual effect of what that achieves in the absence of letting them keep the money? If there is a tax fairness argument to be made here, I'm unclear on exactly what it is, because who cares what the rate is if the municipality is funding it? If you're not making your housing provider worse or better off, because every time there's a tax increase, let's say, you fully fund it, or every time there's a tax decrease, you reduce your portion of the grant, then what difference does it make what tax rate they're paying? I still don't understand what we're trying to achieve with the tax rate portion. Now, I don't want this to be misinterpreted as not being supportive of giving the resources to our housing entity that they need through the proper processes and with their board's support. I think this council has been incredibly supportive in the multi-year budget process of funding millions and millions of dollars into housing, and appropriately so. If there was a need for more money and we just added to the grant, we have the advantage of the county paying for about 15% of that additional grant. So should a business case come forward in a separate process from their board, I would fully consider that. And the advantage of that too is that there would be a transparency component to this, and that we would know exactly what they need to spend the money on. We know they have lots of needs, but we would know exactly what they were proposing to spend the money on, where they are prioritizing that money, and that allows us to be very accountable to our constituents for the ways that we're spending our money, especially when we're spending massive amounts of money on an entity that really needs it. So I'm not adverse to the overall conversation. I'm just unclear on what problem we're actually solving with the tax rate adjustment. And again, this is separate from the budgetary needs and the ongoing budgetary needs of LMCH and trying to make sure that we're repairing those properties. So I'm still not supportive of this particular direction, because although it does not say what we're going to do with the tax savings, it also doesn't back down the grant to make the municipality whole, which was still going to give us potentially a budget shortfall that we don't need at this time. And so I'll continue the conversation, and I'm just not going to support this particular way of doing it at this time. So, but I'm open to listening to the dialogue, and I'm sure the chair or the mover will wrap up. So
thank you, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Further to Councillor Morgan's comments, Deputy Mayor Morgan's comments, I think this is an important discussion, and as he identified it, it's an important discussion. I think the motion that Councillor Helmer's put forward there continues that discussion. By defeating the motion, it ends the discussion for right now, for the foreseeable future. I think we need to keep it alive so that we can explore these aspects of it, especially the county-city relationship. And the County-City Liaison Committee is supposed to meet shortly, and we're looking for agenda items. This could be very well one of those things to discuss. On the operating and the financial statements of any organization, one of the things that you want to see is that their operating costs are as low as possible, so that you have the most effectiveness and efficiency in that organization. By pulling the property tax component, that amount, that portion of the property tax component off of the operating expenses, it decreases their overhead and shows a bit more of a healthy financial picture. I mean, this kind of starts to sound like a bit of an optics argument. It's not, though, because I think the performance of any public entity is one of those things that attracts investment and dollars, whether that's from other levels of government or our own. The other thing this does, I think it could have the potential to do, is provide some a little bit more stability and a little less dependence on municipal grants and transfers. It will still be very dependent on municipal grants and transfers, as well as provincial and federal funding sources, but it makes it a little less so, at least in the books. And I think what Councillor Helmer is putting forward here is a reasonable discussion for us to have and a reasonable thing for us to explore. So I hope you'll support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Your Worship. And a question through you to staff is, could you state when our agreement is up or time for renegotiation with the county regarding housing?
Ms. Barbeau.
Thank you, through the chair. The agreement goes until 2025 with the cost sharing agreement to the county. As part of that agreement, there is an automatic arbitration provision that should it not be negotiated between the two parties before the end of the term, that it will automatically go to arbitration and would have to then be settled through that process.
Councillor.
Thank you. And I know sometimes 2025 seems so far off, but we know it sneaks up pretty quickly. So thank you to Councillor Helmer for bringing this forward. As I read his submission and listened to our comments tonight, I'm realizing it's taxpayers' money kind of in one pocket, back in the other. It's more of almost an accounting cleanup of what do we want to spend our time tracking and taxing. That I am interested in bringing it down to the residential tax rate. I am interested in bringing it down to zero, recognizing we pay it anyways. I do hear our colleagues' concerns, though, that this is a special agreement with Middlesex County and the 85-15 split, that, you know, we're not looking for the London tax base to pick up another 15% when they don't have to. Having heard Councillor Turmer's comments that they're looking for agenda items to discuss at the county of partnerships, I wondered if the mover and seconder of this motion would be favorable to hopefully a friendly amendment that if this passes, that there's also direction to staff to reach out to the county to get this on their docket to bring feedback as well with the report that we're requesting.
I think that's a direct question to the mover and seconder. Perhaps I could ask Councillor Helmer if you've got some thoughts around that.
I think that's a great idea.
If that's an endorsement, is your seconder prepared to support that friendly amendment? Councillor Salih?
I'm good with whatever direction Helmer wants to head in.
That sounds like a double yes. Carry on, please, Councillor Pelosi.
Perfect. No, that was just it. Listening to my colleagues' concerns of what the Middlesex County would be interested in doing with the 85-15 split, and recognizing 2025 is always on the horizon and what we're trying to do for housing. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to support this, that it is a report coming back. Now that will contain feedback from Middlesex County as well, for we can have a more informed discussion when this comes up again. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all my colleagues for this discussion. It's been a good one, and thanks to Councillor Helmer for bringing this forward as well. I agree with the Councillor Pelosi. That was the thing that was always sticking in my mind, was we're taking tax money out of one hand and putting it in another and paying it over here. So it doesn't seem extremely efficient. And I too would be in favor at exploring the idea in the future of going right down to zero. I think it makes sense, and I agree that just because we have a funding partner doesn't preclude us from looking at how we are funding this entity together as partners, we can look at how our community housing is being funded. And I think those conversations are extremely valuable and necessary to have. I wonder as well, and I'll let Councillor Helmer address this when he wraps up, but even the possibility of adding to the report back, possibility of exploring the idea of zero rate for our community housing buildings. Right now, it is concerning that we're treating our community housing buildings, property tax wise, in the exact same manner that we treat large for-profit apartment buildings. Luxury apartment buildings are paying the same property tax rate as our community housing. And I know somebody brought up the idea of optics, and you know, whether or not that should be part of the discussion. It really doesn't. It really doesn't create good optics. And one thing that we really do have to consider as well for the community housing buildings, whatever the tax rate we set at the municipal level, it does affect the property tax, the education portion of their property taxes. So they're paying higher education property taxes right now because of the rate that where they're set. So we would give them an opportunity to lower their operating costs in a couple of different ways by doing this. I do want to remind that Councillor Helmer is asking for a report. There's often conversation about, you know, are we asking for too many reports from staff? Well, I think that this is something that is extremely important. I think it's a valuable report that we are asking for. And as Councillor Pelosi said, it will just generate more, and as Councillor Turner as well said, this will generate more discussion, and all the discussion around housing, affordable housing, social housing, rent geared to income housing, all of the aspects of providing housing across the board for people in London. These are extremely crucial conversations right now. Rather than cutting these conversations short, we need to expand them and look for more opportunities to have these conversations. So I will support asking for this report back from staff.
Thanks very much. Councillor Kebaga.
Thank you, Mayor. I just didn't know if I could speak on it as well, since I was the chair moving it, but I would make my comments now so that Councillor Helmer can have an opportunity to wrap. So I just want to start by thanking Councillor Helmer for bringing this motion forward. This is something that if some staff members could definitely remember, we had conversations about since 2018, because if you look at the number, the percentage that actually this tax number takes up in the budget of LMHC is about 75%. And I just always wondered if there was a way that we can change that. And some of the responses around why we couldn't do it, because of we would lose money from our partners, which is the county. In my mind, I just thought that wasn't a good reason. And given that we still have 5,000 people who are on the wait list to get into housing, and we are constantly trying to figure out ways that we can support our housing initiatives here in London, and as we continue to go through a housing crisis. So it would be, you know, important for us to figure out why LMHC, a social housing organization that provides housing to people who can afford full rent, would have to pay taxes that high. And it's like we give them money and we take it right back. So the support that we're actually giving is removed right at the beginning before they're even able to cover any of their costs. So I am so happy that we are having this discussion and that we can get a report that will explore other ways that we can change this. It's important. It's long overdue. At the beginning of this year, we invested about $43 million into social housing. And if we had already figured out this taxing disparity a long time ago, perhaps we could have maybe have figured out this social housing issue that's been downloaded on us for many, many years. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of housing, and I think this is the right direction to go to. And I appreciate seeing the support that it's getting, and I would encourage other councilors to support it so that we can at least get the opportunity to see different ways that we can make taxing in our community a little bit more fair.
Thank you. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I don't very often wait till the end of the discussion or near to it to talk, but I wanted to make sure I heard everything. And I was looking for something that would sort of convince me that my initial opposition to this route to deal with this problem was not the proper route. And my mind hasn't been changed. And, you know, I start from the point of view of what is London Middlesex community housing. And it's housing that I certainly as a councillor get complaints about on a very regular basis in terms of its livability, its appropriateness for people, the ability of people to move into that housing, into better housing. And through the work I do on an everyday basis as a lawyer, I see it also. And I have sat here for 6 years and we've put a lot of money into London Middlesex community housing. Every year we put more money into London Middlesex community housing. And I haven't seen the results out of that additional money that I thought we should see. And now we're awaiting a reorganization, presumably a new governance structure. I actually engaged in that process to talk about a new governance structure. What is that path forward? And it seems to me that what we're doing today is not getting a report back. I respectfully disagree. The idea this is just sort of an informational report that we're going to get back. It's very specific in what it says. It's very specific in saying what's to come back is a plan to reduce the taxes for London Middlesex community housing. And the idea that we would then go on, or the intention is to then go on and say, as part of that, we're going to claw back the grant to equal that. I don't think that's what we're talking about doing. I think what we're talking about doing really at its essence is giving London Middlesex community housing additional money. We're going to give them more money through this method. And they want it, and they will use it, and it will solve a problem. Well, we don't know where that money would go. We don't know where that additional money is going to go. We certainly know it's not going to reduce rents because the rents are set out by statute. We don't know what the position is of London Middlesex community housing. What will they do with the money? I would certainly like to know what they're going to do if they have additional money. In fact, we now know today that there's been no additional budget request. I would feel a lot better if there was an additional budget request that I could match this money to, something that they really need, but I don't have that as I'm sitting here today. So really, I think at essence what we're doing is we're not asking for a report back to think about something. Very specific, the ask is, we'll reduce the tax and they're gonna get more money. And the commentary that Councillor Helmer provided really points to that they'll have more money in their pocket and be able to do additional things. But I can tell you that that's a discussion that I wanna have where there's a plan attached to it. If I'm gonna take taxpayer money and hand it over to anything, there's got to be a plan attached to it. We are still waiting for that plan to see what will happen. And the idea that if we don't approve this today, we'll never be able to have a discussion again about giving London Middlesex community housing more money or dealing with their tax issue, that's not, in my view, accurate. I'm more than prepared to revisit this issue in a comprehensive way when we get a report back from London Middlesex community housing, which we are going to get very soon. And they may be able to identify to us ways that we should be helping them. But I've gone down this road too many times where London Middlesex community housing says, if you just give us more money, it will make everything better. And it hasn't happened. So this to me is a cumbersome way to do what I'm not comfortable doing, which is to give out money without a plan attached to it.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Deputy Mayor to take the chair, please.
Yes, I'll go to the mayor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask staff, if I can, please. I read your recommendation with great interest, and colleagues, that is that we receive the report and that no action be taken regarding the reduction of the effective tax rate for LMCH buildings. So I read that with great interest, as I did Councillor Helmer's response to that, and he's quite correct. this did not pass on a tie, so hence it's come forward today. And, you know, I'm listening to comments from colleagues, but now I'd like to just hear a bit more from staff if I can, because ultimately they were pretty strong in their recommendation that saying that providing property tax exemptions to LMCH is not an efficient way to provide support to them or to the city. And I just wonder, could you just elaborate on that, Ms. Barbone? Through you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, through the chair. So perhaps maybe the report is not clear enough to explain exactly how this process works. So let me clarify. So this first step, when the city invokes the municipal housing bylaw, what has traditionally been done with affordable housing is that the taxes are not actually reduced or changed. They are in fact written off by the City of London. So that write-off of the taxes is the difference that would make it equivalent to the residential rate. So MPAC does not change their assessment. MPAC does not do evaluation. We simply write off the taxes. So that is 100% funded City of London expense that you would need to add to the City of London budget. So at the end of 4 years, at the end of a phase-in, you would have to add in $1.8 million, approximately $1.6 million, which would be the cost to the taxpayer, less the education share, which is saved. So then the second step is that through the budget process, you would look at whether you would reallocate based on the allocation of the LMCH budget, those funds. So if the city were to, if LMCH were to fully reduce their budget to the extent of the savings, so if the full savings is $1.8 million and LMCH were to reduce their budget by LMCH by $1.8 million, LMCH would have no additional funding and would be in the exact same place whether they're paying the taxes at the full rate. However, the City of London would still in that instance recognize a tax rate increase that is a result of the savings that you would realize in the education tax, completely offset by the remainder of the subsidy that you are now going to lose because of the cost sharing arrangement. So what that means is the city is picking up the full effect of the reduction, and you're going to have a tax rate increase even if LMCH was in the same position. So if you were going to give that money directly to LMCH, you would pay 15% more, and it would be cheaper for the taxpayers to fund LMCH based on their budget submission directly than it would be to reduce the taxes because of the write-off process. So I think from our perspective, if you proceed with this, it will cost more than the alternative, which means you have less money to invest in the City of London priorities and create a budget issue. So this is very much a budget issue. So the fairness discussion is a tax policy issue, but from this perspective, it is clearly a budget issue that this is the results that would come of it.
So,
Mayor.
Thank you. So through you, Chair, to Ms. Barbone. So why would we do that? I mean, I understand the spirit of and the perception of, and maybe even the politics of trying to say to residents of LMCH that we are looking to do the right thing. How does that reconcile with the financial implications that you just cited, Ms. Barbone? Because I'm just trying to get my head around it. Because I know the colleagues have said, as I've heard them speak, that the spirit of this seems right, and isn't it too bad that we don't have a rate that's either at the residential rate or at zero? But are you suggesting that there's a significant financial implication? I thought that's what I heard, but I really want to lay that out so that we understand, particularly in a year when, in years going forward, when the financial implications of this fall back on the taxpayer. If we're serious about being mindful of the implications to the taxpayer, why would we do this, Ms. Barbone?
So it's true.
Ms. Barbone, I'll go to you. I'll just say you don't have to weigh into the debate from why would council do something, but I believe there are questions in there about the financial impacts that would need comment on.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you through the chair. What I was going to clarify was the financial impact of the two methods. So if you use the municipal housing bylaw to provide a write-off on taxes. The city will pay a higher, the taxpayer will pay more than if if LMCH presents their budget with the same increase that is cost shared between the two parties. So out of those two options, the city, LMCH would be in the exact same situation. One will cost the City of London taxpayers more than the other.
Mayor.
And over the life of this contract, how much would that be, Ms. Barbone? Through you, Chair.
Go ahead.
So assuming the full $1.8 million, so it's basically it's the 15% of the full subsidy, which is the difference that you would end up paying more. So essentially the report shows that if you were to provide the increase of the $1.69 million, it's a 0.264% increase to the taxpayers using this with a tax exemption applied through the municipal housing bylaw. However, if you were to simply raise the taxes or raise the funds to support LMCH in a $1.8 million increase, the actual increase in the city tax levy in that case would be 0.23. So it's a little bit lower. There's a minute difference, and the savings is with respect to the education taxes, which is offset by the loss in subsidy fully by the 15%.
So my final comment, Chair, is this. If I've got additional monies available, I'd rather look to ways we can reduce taxes or keep more money in the hands of taxpayers. The residents of LMCH are not disadvantaged as a result of that. I've certainly heard that, and so unless this is about optics and the perception of doing the right thing, I'm mindful of the implications it has to the everyday taxpayer. So with that, that'll be my final comment. I will not be supporting the amendment, notwithstanding the spirit of it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to hand the chair back over to the mayor. I don't have anyone currently on the speakers list.
And I have no other individuals on, thank you, Chair. I have no other individuals on the speakers list. So with that, I'm going to ask the councillor who put the amendment forward to provide a wrap. Councillor
Elmer. Thank you. Well, I've never been one to leave an attempt to persuade on the table. I am disappointed by some of the comments that I heard tonight. I'm going to try and convince people to give it one more try. When we make this change and we partially exempt the properties so we can lower the effective tax rate, the real savings to Middlesex Community Housing and all the funders of Middlesex Community Housing is the provincial education tax savings. So when we make a change like that, you'll see it in the report, it's $126,000 with a partial exemption to bring it down so that the rate is effective. That is a permanent long-term savings, and the impact of that falls on the province and not on the city and not on the county and not on the tenants. So the cost sharing agreement problem, I mean, that is, I think, a bit of a red herring. Like we're looking at that and we're getting really caught up in what happens with the cost sharing with the county. And there's a couple of scenarios, right? We haven't decided exactly what's going to happen if we decided to reduce the property tax expense, what would happen with expenses at community housing generally, if they stayed the same. So if Middlesex Community Housing retained that money, the grant didn't change, we didn't change anything else, we just lowered the property tax expense, and they spent the money on something else, nothing would change with the county. Nothing would change with the city, except we'd have to come up with that money from somewhere else other than community housing, right? So we would have to raise property taxes on all the other property taxpayers, which is what the report is identifying. So people have different views about whether that's a good idea or whether we should reduce the subsidy and claw it back. And if we do the clawback, then yes, there would be an impact because Middlesex County is not going to put in as much money because the overall expenses for community housing have gone down. And of course, they're not going to contribute money if the overall expenses have gone down. I do not think it's a good idea to raise extra money from Middlesex County by keeping the tax rate higher. Like the real cost of community housing are after taxes. And I think we should just get it down to the residential rate, have a real accounting of what the actual costs are. If that means that Middlesex County has a little bit less that they have to contribute, so be it. I think that's the right and the fair thing to do. And I mean, I didn't get into politics to do a bunch of things that are popular or good optics or something like that. And I think my voting record shows that. I have not been afraid to tackle issues that are not popular and frankly are very difficult. I want to be able to go and look the people who live in Booley and Huron Street and 202 McNay and tell them that I did everything I possibly could to get the property tax rate on those buildings down to the same rate as all the condo buildings, as my own property. We can do that. And if the net cost of it in the wash is $70,000, you know, after you factor in the provincial education tax savings, the transfers to the county, you know, if we did the worst case scenario at the county, we could convince them to do the same. It could end up being a very small impact. I mean, we could say, you know, we lowered the property tax expense. I think the people who live in community housing would be happier to have a more and better place to live with the same grant that they're getting now. And that's my preference. I can tell that other people want to pull the grant back. And we could have that discussion. We could find some kind of compromise, which is they could keep half the money and we could pull back half the money. It doesn't have to be a sort of all or nothing. And I do think we can make progress in this. We could do a couple of buildings in 2021 partway through the year, and the impact could be in the hundreds of thousands. Like that's it, you know, next year. And then 2022, it could be a little bit more because we got the full year of taxation. That can be phased and staged to kind of fit what people are comfortable doing. And I do think that this is an important thing to move on. I can tell you if it doesn't go through tonight, I'll be back here 12 months and 1 day later, bringing the same thing forward. You know, and maybe we'll have to go after a full exemption and try and be more aggressive. And I think the idea is to get a staff report so we can see how could we do that responsibly over a 4-year period. Like, there are alternatives. You know, we could just have motions and say, let's just do it on this building right now. And I don't think that's the right way to handle it. I think we should deal with it in an appropriate way, get a nice report, come forward in a couple of months. We can tackle it. We can talk to the county, which I think should have happened between the last time we asked for a report and now. And I know that people are going to have different ideas about what to do with the savings, but I find it hard to understand why we can't agree that the property tax expense should go down.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, that was a wrap. So we will now call the question to the amendment as presented.
Closing the vote, the motion's lost, 7-8.
Colleagues, I'll now turn your attention to 2.1, taxation of properties owned by London Middlesex, and we will, I apologize, that's been put forward. Back to the main motion, we'll call the question.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Kaibaga, please.
The motion failed at committee, so what motion are we voting on?
The motion that's been presented to staff, what failed it? I'll ask the clerk to clarify then, please.
Through the chair, what passed at committee was the motion to receive the staff report. That's what's on the floor.
Are we good, Councillor? Thank you. Any other comments or questions? And you'll see the question on the floor.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 11-4.
Thank you. Before we move on, I'd like to say to the chair, Councillor Kabaga, and to members of the committee, thank you very much for your service. I know this is the final meeting that you've had, Councillor Kabaga. Thank you for your leadership on the committee. That sincerely matters. And to members of the committee for your participation as well. Thank you from all of us. Colleagues, I'm not aware of any deferred matters, and I've not been made aware of any inquiries or emergent motions. So we have a number of bylaws to pass before we go into closed session. I've been asked to pull bylaw 6, and for the benefit of colleagues, bylaw 6 separately will be the bylaw to amend the London Plan for the City of London 2016 related to protected major transit station areas. Does anyone wish any other bylaw or bill to be pulled for voting consideration? So we'll be voting 2 through 5 and 7 through 17. So I'll look for a mover and seconder for introduction, first reading of those bills. Is there a mover, please? Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Will call the vote.
Councillor Hillier?
I vote yes, it's hanging up.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, I look for a mover and seconder for second reading of bills 2 through 5, 7 through 17. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, I'll look for a mover and seconder of third reading and enactment of bills 2 through 5 and 7 through 17. Mover, please. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Lehman. We'll call the vote.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll now turn your attention to bylaw 6 for the benefit of people viewing. That deals with bylaw to amend the London Plan relating to protected major transit station areas. We've been asked to call that separately. I'll look for a mover and seconder of introduction, first reading of Bill 6. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-1.
Colleagues, I'll look for a mover and second for second reading of Bill 6. Is there a mover, please? Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Any comments or discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-1.
Thank you, colleagues. And finally, I'll look for a mover and seconder for third reading and enactment of Bill 6. Is there a mover, please? Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. We'll call the question.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion's carried 14-1.
Thank you, colleagues. As we move into closed session, I'll call on the clerk just to advise the public the issues that we're generally dealing with. Clerk, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're going into closed session for the 3 reasons out of the Corporate Service Committee meeting that were posted on the public agenda: land disposition, personal matters, and litigation or potential litigation.
Thanks very much. So I'll look for a motion to go into closed session. Is there a mover, please? Councillor Edmund, seconded by Councillor Lehman. We'll call the question with a hand vote, and if you would just turn your screens on, please, so we can see all of you smiling for the benefit of the clerk. Those who support going to closed session.
That motion's carried.
Thanks, colleagues. Just give us a couple of moments, please.